Coming up this week on the Digital Lifestyle Show, I'm joined by Sean Faling, a musician and synth enthusiast, and he's going to be talking about his collection of synths, how he got into collecting the synths and maintaining them, and what you've got to do to maintain them, and buying and selling them in this age when vintage synths have become so expensive. It's always great talking to someone with a passion for technology, in this case, vintage synths. We have got some more interviews coming up over the next few weeks. We're going to be talking a bit of Windows. We're going to be talking Microsoft Surface, and we're talking music tech as well. So we've got a whole range of stuff coming over. So please keep your comments coming, and you can leave comments in. You can send me an email, ian@thislifestyle.com. Do like talking to people with passions for technology, be it music or computers or vintage tech, whatever it is. So please keep your comments coming in. Right, let's get to Sean. Sean, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
And it's great to get you on. I've been really keen to do some of these shows with synth enthusiasts, collectors. I don't know what's the correct term. Some people, I mentioned this on a forum a few weeks ago, and some people got a bit offended by the word collector with synths. So are you an enthusiast, musician, collector?
Well, I'm a musician. That's where I started the journey. And I still play live music, so I never stopped doing that. But I transitioned from collecting vintage guitars to vintage synths. I'd always been after them, but for a while, you just couldn't find them used. But if you could, they were cheap.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about, interesting that, going from guitar to synths, but we'll come back to talk about synths. So before we dive into that, just tell us a bit about you and what you do.
Well, I'm a sculptor. I went to school at CU Boulder, and I got my MFA in the sculpture program. I went for painting, but as soon as they showed me how to make 3D objects, I was like, I got to make synthesizers. So for the 4 years I was there, I was doing critiques with lots of mediums, but I was presenting functional synthesizers to an art department. So that's kind of how I transitioned to this. And now I make and sell synthesizers as sculptures, like functional pieces of art. And I also fix and restore synthesizers, and I buy two and sell one, keep one, but it managed to keep me floating, so I'm doing okay.
And then you mentioned doing still doing live music, so are you still playing and performing?
I haven't in a year or so. I moved to New Jersey, where I am now, on the East Coast from Colorado. And Colorado had like a third less people. It was much easier to, find gigs and whatnot. They didn't pay so well, because now I'm 2 miles from Manhattan. I'm really right up against the Hudson River. And it's hard to get gigs there. They do pay, but it's difficult to kind of reestablish yourself in your late 40s.
Yeah, so you've got to sort of find your where you fit in with the scene and everything.
Yeah, all of my friends are gone. I had all these friends here that were obsessed with synthesizers, and they've all they just all disappeared. So it's really interesting. So I'm trying to have to start over from scratch as far as finding people to jam with and stuff like that. People who just want to hang out and talk about electronic music or synthesizers. It's really difficult to get people off the computer these days.
Yeah, definitely. And and that's where I actually came across you, was it on one of the on the Vintage Synth Facebook group, because like you, I like talking vintage synthesizers and music tech, and my wife doesn't really want to have another chat about my Gen SX 1000. She's heard all about that, or so sometimes it's nice to interact with other people that are using this. I mean, for a long time, I always, pre-internet, you kind of felt like you were on your own with some of this stuff. But now there's this massive community out there.
Hundreds of groups with over 100,000 members. In the year 2002, I had 2 friends, and my resources were maybe 50 items on eBay, so I could kind of track the values of things, and Sonic State and Vintage Synths Explorer. That was it. There was no groups, there was no Facebook, there was no controversy, there was no, wine, cork sniffer and elitist. There was none of that shit. It was just cool people that were into synthesizers.
Yeah, and I think the attitude to them has changed over time, hasn't it? I mean, in the late 80s, into the 90s, it was kind of you don't need you get a grunge band, you don't need a keyboard player. And then that sort of big 80s polysynth sound went really out, and of course things come around full circle, and now people covet these these vintage
Yeah.
synths.
Yeah, and during the 80s, man, these things were expensive. I mean, they cost more than a used car then. So in my perspective, I buy low as possible. I spend the very least amount of money. So if I'm buying something, I buy it in the idea that if I can't fix it, I can recoup my money. But this is like a new thing. I have close to 100 synthesizers, but I don't have very much money invested at all.
Right, yeah. Yeah, because I think one of the things I've mentioned on this show before to other guests is some of my most cherished synths are actually the cheapest ones. One down there is a Gen SX 1000.
Yeah, those are nice.
Camera could pick that, yeah, which I got for £35.
Oh, nice. That feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah, in 1988, yeah. And the other one is a DX 100, which is up there, which I got when I was 15 for my for Christmas one year. So
wow, these are lucky.
Yeah, these are kind of cherished possessions. But so if you went out to try to buy a Jupiter 8 now, I mean, you're talking thousands, hundreds of thousands in some cases. I see a CS80 at 100,000 or something. It's crazy money.
In 2016, I lived in a very small town in Colorado, and I was on Craigslist 24/7 trying to buy and sell synthesizers, and a CS80 popped up for sale. It was all serviced, recalibrated, everything, $16,000. And the guy wouldn't let me come look at it. He's like, less than a few blocks from my house. And he's like, if you don't have the money, you don't come look at it. And of course, I didn't have 16,000, but now they're like 60,000. I mean, hindsight, I should have took out a loan, but I didn't really think of things that way then.
Yeah, and that's where it becomes interesting, this issue about collectors versus the enthusiast, because although there is that massive amount, they're not like a CS. If you've got a CS80 and just put it away, in 2 years' time or whatever, it might be worth more, but you've got to look after it, haven't you? And how do you go about doing that?
With my synthesizers, I've always been kind of under the idea that I can, if someone else can fix it, I can learn how to fix it. So it started off with, I got 3 Juno 106s. One of them was just trashed. One of them was brand new, and or it's like completely, all the voice cards were new, battery, everything, and another one needed a lot of work. So I fixed the 2 up, and I was able to flip those 2. So I made money and got like a mint 106. But those are kind of the things that drove me. Like, there's no way I could buy certain synthesizers unless they were broken. And so that was interesting to me. Like, I had a Poly 6 that I bought. I mean, it was museum quality, if not a flaw on it, but it got hit with a power surge. It took me 6.5 years to find a technician that would fix it. It was beyond my capabilities, and it cost like $680. So, I mean, that's a big concern when you're getting into vintage gear. Like, it's going to happen, and you got to be prepared to turn a wrench. And if not, you have to be able to afford to service it.
Yeah, and then I guess, I suppose it's how do you then find out that find these people to repair them?
Oh, it's hard. It's like hiring a hitman or something. You have to know somebody who knows somebody, and there's always somebody who's like, oh, there was this guy Tom, and he used to fix all our stuff. And they'll give you an email address, and you'll email that guy, and he may write back, I might be able to do it, but then never gets back to you again. And eventually found a technician who worked on Vangelis's gear, and he was a 6-hour round trip for me. I took my synth to him, and he was also one of the engineers behind the Voyatra 8. And I felt like it was worth every penny. And it was so nice. I just didn't want it to be like half functional. I wanted it to reflect its the condition it's in. So now it's like owning a brand new one.
Yeah. So you said you what kind of repairs would you undertake then? At what point do you think, no, this is not for me to do?
I can signal trace, I can swap out batteries, I can restore factory settings, I can take out any potentiometer, sliders, LEDs, anything that's mechanically removed and replaced, as long as it's not SMD components. I just don't have the tools to do that. So I try to stick with vintage gear, because when you pop the hood, it's like an old car. The parts are right there, and you just swap them out. These other ones use 100 parts in like 2 inches. And they're all surface mounted, so you have to, learn thermal paste. You have to get electron microscope, all that stuff. So there's a lot of value in knowing someone who can do that. And the technician that fixed my Poly 6, I asked him, I said, when all this Behringer gear breaks, can you fix them? And he said, of course I can. So, there's confidence there. I don't know if it's worth it as far as investing, the value as far as putting into like a newer instrument as it's depreciating. You can just replace it. But it's nice to know that they are repairable.
Yeah, and some of these things, like CS80 or Jupiter 8, are not just they're worth a lot, but they're also like a cultural item now, aren't they? They're part of culture, pop culture in general, not just music culture.
Well, so many people know the names now. Like if I meet somebody, my wife will introduce me to a lot of people. She loves electronic music. Her and I play in a band together. We don't do it seriously, but she doesn't mind when I come home with a synth every month. And that's awesome. And she knows that that's what drives me. So she supports that. And my argument is every guy's into something. Like there's a guy outside of my window with a 4-wheel drive truck that he spent 10 times more than I did. And then it's depreciating. It's falling apart. Like snowmobiles, motorcycles, boats. These are all things I'm not interested in. And, this happens to be my hobby.
And you went from the transition from collecting sort of vintage guitars to synths. What made you move over?
I always wanted synths, always, for my whole childhood. Like on every Christmas list, it was, please get me a synthesizer, please get me a synthesizer. And that dream sort of faded because you could go to the guitar shop and there was like, towards the end of the 80s, they had like in Sonic gear and stuff that was clear over $1,000, no knobs on the front panel, no way to really introduce yourself to synthesis. There was really nothing to do. So in my trips up and down the East Coast buying vintage guitars, I would run into synthesizers. And typically they were very cheap. So I'd buy them and then I would go home and learn how to use them. But I remember I have an MS-10 right here. That was my first analog synth. And for 6 months, I could only make it do laser sounds. Like I couldn't play a tune on it. I didn't know anything about envelopes or filters, nothing.
And those are the days where you couldn't just go on YouTube, type the name in, and see 50 videos on it.
Those are the days when you're lucky to get a 5-minute MPEG from somebody, and you had to like wait for 30 minutes for it to download. Yeah, there was nothing to learn from. I think maybe if I had looked harder, but I was very busy in my 20s, so I really didn't spend that much time researching.
Yeah, and I guess a bit like I said earlier on, there was that phase where you were maybe interested, but the general population wasn't. That was a good time to be into them because they were cheap. Yeah, but now the interest there, but it's made them really expensive.
I think it's sort of like the guitars, because for a while guitars were affordable, and now those are up in thousands also. But what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. That it was accessible then, and where it is now, like you either have to buy something new that maybe inferior or may not be, I don't know, or take on the risk of buying a vintage synthesizer, and then you have to know that there's competition out there that aren't just musicians. There's a lot of people out there just buying to sell these. Like once things get to a certain value point, everybody comes out after them. You've got people that used to collect fishing lures are now after synthesizers so they can flip them on Reverb and eBay.
Yeah, that's the thing. I remember I used to scour pre-eBay, local. I think it was trader magazines. Here in the UK, and there'll be a music section, and you could buy some. I bought a Mirage and a JX3P, and then later sold them. Unfortunately, but yeah, you could just go and do that, and you would be 20 miles down the road. You go and have a look, pay the cash, and that was.
Oh, you could think about it.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Back then, you could see something for sale, and you could be like, I don't know, and it'll be there for a month. And like you're looking at the values, because it feels good to buy something undervalued. So like, I bought JX3P for $200 with the PG200, and online then they were selling for maybe $350, $400. So it wasn't that big of a deal, but I thought that I got a really good deal on the synthesizer. And I felt that was like one that nobody knew about at the time. Like they were always in like a guitar shop in the corner. A lot of people who got them as like gifts and introductions, maybe even using as a piano, and they just sit.
Yeah, and I think I sold you. You'd probably end up with my GX3P. I had a GX3P with the PG200 programmer and sold that in the late 90s. Yeah, I think I ended up buying this. I can't even remember what I bought instead. But never mind. It was just. But at that time, there wasn't really that. I mean, I always treasured my Gen because they were old and that was always felt. But the JX kind of felt, oh, it's not polysynth, it's not it's not a mini Moog. It's I'll get rid of it. I'm not using it. But now of course, I realise that. But then, hindsight is wonder if you could go back in time, you could get a lot of vintage synths. I remember seeing them in music shops. So the analog synths on the shelf. My friend brought a SH09. I think he paid 90 quid for it when I was at college with him. They're beautiful. Cheap. Yeah. But then so you got into collecting these. So do you have like a criteria then on what you have, like a date range or a price range or something that suited for you?
I started off pretty interesting. I was like, I was playing krautrock with this guy who lived down the street from me, and we played every Saturday for like 6 hours. It was awesome. And he was teaching me more. He was like probably like 8 years older than me, so he was teaching me about stuff that I didn't know. He didn't know synth so well, but he knew music. And I was obsessed with analog gear, so I thought digital was like just garbage. So it was easy for me to go buy a digital synth for $75 and flip it for $350 and just keep doing that so I could get what I really wanted. And I always told my wife, like when I brought one home, she's like, "Are you going to keep that?" And I was like, "We'll see how it mixes, So I would go downstairs and jam with this guy. And if it sounded like shit, it was on eBay that night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So really the older, the better.
Yeah. So musical influences then that you were listening to? What were these analog synths or what music were you listening to that sort of drove that?
It started out with Tangerine Dream.
My personal favorite.
Like Depeche Mode. Then I revisited all the synth pop, and then industrial music hit. And I was like a huge Nine Inch Nails fan when I was 16. And then I went and bought a Skinny Puppy album, and I hadn't heard of them yet. I never listened to Nine Inch Nails quite the same way again. Like that became an obsession of mine. And trying to think of more relevant bands, like Vangelis, of course. Blade Runner was like a huge inspiration to me. My dad watched it with me when I was 8 years old in '83, and ever since then, when we got like hi-fi gear at home, my dad would test it out by playing Blade Runner's main titles, and he would just crank it. He doesn't like synthesizers, but there was something about that movie. And that sound got in my head, and I always wanted a synthesizer that would make sounds like that. And of course, I had no idea what did it back then. I had no idea what a CS80 was. There was just no information. I thought any analog synth would make that sound.
Yeah, I think that's why I ended up getting the Gen, because I'm really into Tangerine Dream, and I got into them in the 80s, sort of around Live Miles and that period, and then went backwards. And then when I got the chance of this Gen, and that makes sounds like it was on one of the earlier albums. So that's kind of where I got into it. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Tangerine Dream, right the way through all the eras, really.
I liked it up until like the Melrose era. Then it got a little bit too commercial sounding for me.
Yeah, I think Melrose is where most Tangerine Dream fans seem to get up to. Yeah.
Different lineups.
Yeah, I always enjoy. I went to see them just after the Melrose, around that.
Oh yeah.
I think it was the Melrose tour, so I was really glad I got to see them. It would have been great to have seen them in early 80s, time when which is probably my favorite period. But yeah, they were great. So what have you got now? You mentioned you've got some in storage. So what makes you choose between having them out where you are now and in storage?
Well, now I was like, when I moved, I sold my house, and basically I made a ship in a bottle. My studio was just tiny, and like it would fit 2 people. That's it. Like I called it the Hubble or the ISS when people came in, and you had to crawl under things and stuff. So when we moved out here, my wife's parents are from here, and they're in their late 80s. So I told her at a certain point in time we would move back here and look for a house. And so that studio would blossom into a functional recording studio, and that was going to be what I'll probably do for the rest of my life. That's taking a little longer than I'd like, so I've had to go to the storage unit and pick out the ones that came home with me, and I picked out ones that kind of covered all the bases. Like, I'll give you an idea. So I've got the MS-20, the MS-10, JX3P. I got a D50 here. I have a Kawai K2000 or K5000S, and I got the MFB Dominion 1, Yamaha CS5. I've got a ton of rack synths like the JV 2080, the SC 880. And out of those, and my Poly 6 up front also, as well as my Crewmar Performer. I have to have strings. That's where Tangerine came in. Strings and a phaser. Like, I love that sound. Like, if I collect anything, it's string machines. And recently I picked up Performer version B, which is the good one with the Prophet. I gotta get my cat off this. With the Prophet filter on it, and it's dead, but it's brand new. The guy never even used it. It had all the pamphlets in it. It had the covers, the case. So I felt like I did pretty good, but it's going to take a little bit to resurrect that one.
Yeah, no, I suppose when you get something like that, though, it's a nice project. It's like you mentioned earlier, people get old cars and renovate them, or buy houses and do loft conversions and things. It's a project in its own right, and you put the work in, and then it's great when you get the end result.
Yeah. So since now I think I have like all the bases covered. The only thing I feel like I'm missing is sequencers. I really want a ratcheting sequencer that I don't have to use modular gear to make it work. I need it to like store presets, and there's only like a couple of those available right now. So that's kind of what I'm saving up for at the moment.
And that gets you the Tangerine Dream type.
Yeah, the Berlin School sound. It just really is amazing. I'll listen to anything that's got the Berlin School sound.
Yeah. So the criteria that you use to get, or do you go back to your storage and say, okay, I'm going to take this one back and pull this other one out, or do you generally find you stick with one set?
I took my Mirage back. I took my DX7 back. Oh, I also have a DX11 here. That's a real special synthesizer.
I used to have one of those, yeah.
It's got all the waveforms. It's the only FM with waveforms.
Yeah, that's another one I sold and should have kept.
I got it for $100 like 6 months ago.
Wow.
It needed a battery and a key, and I fixed it. And it's the case was tore up, and it's one thing you have to be able to see through the presentation to understand that it, with a little bit of love and care, this thing is going to really shine. If it's really beat up, I really don't have the same connection. And it's not like a guitar. Like, synthesizers don't look good with dents and rust and scratches. They just don't.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a, I think it's called feedback leader. There's a certain sound on there that I've got a TX7.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And because I wanted the DX7 because when I was a kid, I used to watch Top of Pops here in the UK. It was the big music show. Tuesday night you'd watch it, and all the bands had DX7s. What I didn't realise, of course, is they're all miming. And they weren't using DX7s, but to me, that's what I thought. So I got the DX100 that when I was a kid as well. But I always really wanted the DX7, but I hadn't got space for one, so I thought TX7 is the next best thing. So I got that, but I've tried to recreate that feedback lead that I heard on the DX11. I've never quite managed to get it because of the waveforms, like you said.
Yeah, it's tricky. I kind of program mine just by ear, and like I kind of have an idea what's going on. But the interesting thing about the DX7 is if you make a mistake, it's kind of hard to go backwards. It's hard to undo everything, so you're kind of stuck when you're programming that. I realized with my drum machines, all the Yamaha drum machines are like that too. Like if they have parameter changes, once you change that, it's changed. Like you have to dig yourself back out of that hole or put in the sounds again.
Yeah, and that's actually. I paired that up with it. I've got an RX5 up there.
Oh, nice.
And that was one of those things, like you said, I got that quite cheap about 5 years ago or something, maybe more like that. It's fairly cheap, and now they've really gone up in value. Yeah,
I have one of those and the RX11. I do collect drum machines, so I would say if I collect two things, it'd be string machines and drum machines. They're just always handy. They're just really nice instruments. But my main goal was to offer these access to these instruments in a recording environment. And so that would be an incentive to come record with me because you have access to all those instruments. So you don't have to, you don't have to buy them. You don't have to maintain them. I do all that. So you just come record. I've got reel-to-reels. I've got digital 24 tracks. I've got everything, but I don't really have a DAW setup. That's the only thing I don't really have.
That's a great idea because, yeah, like you said, they're expensive and hard to
Yeah,
maintain. But if you got an itch to record with a Kumar string machine or whatever, then you come to your place and do that. I
yeah.
think that's a good idea.
The
And
only thing I don't have is Moogs, and I have a couple ARPs, but the American synthesizers, for some reason, they just don't show up for sale very often. And when they do, they're always expensive. Moogs have always kind of been expensive.
yeah, even when in the sort of
Yeah.
90s when they were cheap, synths were cheap in general. Yeah, they had the prestige to them.
Well, I mean, people that played, jazz and fusion, they all used them. It wasn't like a crazy CS30 or something that sounds really out there. They're really basic sounds that they can use in so many different applications. So and they really, Moog was like the brand everyone knew too. Not everybody knew all these weird ones. And I prided myself in learning about all the synthesizers I possibly could, but there's always one or two that pop up, and I'm like, oh man, I never heard of that. Like the Logan Choir. If you know Marco from Retro Sound, he's
Yes.
got all
Yeah.
those. Yeah, he's got all those vocalist synths and stuff, and just really amazing stuff. Like the Sultan Programmer 24, I think that is. Yeah, he's got all that, and those things aren't very common.
Yeah. So in terms of what you've got currently, so what are your favorite sort of mono synths that you've got at the moment?
Mono synths, I have to go back to the MS-10. I can play it blindfolded. The filter is massive. It's only a 12 dB filter, but for some reason it just really sweeps hard, and I just know how to use that synthesizer so well. It's got to be my favorite mono synth of all time. But I'm really loving this MFB Dominion 1. It really does everything you need a synthesizer to do. It doesn't sound as sweet as a Moog though, but it's got 3 oscillators. It's got a million different parameters that you can patch to, and it's pretty amazing. But I'm also liking. I got this Yamaha CS5. I think about 4 months ago, and I'd never played one, and I really love the sound of it. It sounds very sweet.
Yeah, it's the CSs. I always think have got a unique sort of sound to them. They don't sound like other mono synths.
Yeah, they don't. They really don't.
And then, so if you're pulling out polysynths, what would you go for there? Your Poly 60?
Um, that's a tough one. That's really tough. I have favorites. I have all the JXs. I have all the Junos. Juno 60 is something I come back to a lot. 106 is something I come back to a lot. Uh, I know it'll escape me right now, because if I was in my other studio, I could be like, well, there's this and this and this.
Yeah.
But those are kind of the staples that I use on most
Yeah.
of my recordings.
And then you mentioned the sort of the string machine. So what's the extremes you've got? So the most common one that people know of, and then some of the rarer ones.
I've got ARP Omni 2. I've got the Kumar Performer A. I've got a really beat up Performer B. That's my favorite string machine, the Performer B. And I bought this other one that's in mint condition, but it's no big hurry for me to fix it. I have 2 other ones. Let me think of the other ones I have. I've got the Yamaha SK50D, that big dual register one.
Oh, I saw your video of that one. Yeah, that looks amazing.
That thing's crazy. Let me think of. I don't know the other ones offhand. Like I'm getting older, so I'm getting a little more forgetful. But the SK50 is nice. Oh, I got a Kumar Orchestrator. I've got a Lowry V120. I think it was like a home model, but it really has a built-in analog string machine. But the problems with most of these is I'm not a very good keyboardist. I'm a good sound effects and sound player, and I can play chords and I can fake my way around stuff, but I'm really good at producing sounds. And I use a long attack. So if I mess up on a chord, it doesn't immediately, affect the music. I can switch back. And a lot of these ones, the attack is just like there, even at the longest setting. The Kumar, though, it creeps up real slow, and it just sounds so haunting and lovely. And a lot of these other ones, like the Orchestrator, they don't have any attack settings at all.
Yeah.
So I don't play them as much.
Yeah, I remember Tony Banks of Genesis saying with the issue he used to have with the early analog monosynths was that, if you play a bum note, everyone hears it. Where if you go on a piano, you can catch, you don't quite hear it the same.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a fear. I used to play drums in a band for a while, and that's another instrument. You mess up, everybody knows it. Like
Yeah.
we got like a well-known guitarist, and he says, "You're driving the bus." He's like, "You fuck up, everybody fucks up," and I was like, "Oh shit!" But I managed to not fuck up on stage. So
Yeah. So then going into digital synths, are you getting? You mentioned a couple earlier on. So you're okay? You collect digital synths as well?
yeah,
Some people have a big cutoff on them.
Oh yeah. So I wanted a Mellotron really bad. Of course, everybody wants a Mellotron. Because there's really nowhere to get the choir sounds, to get those really rich choirs. So I did some research. I found out that some of these JVs had choirs and voice cards in them. So I bought a JV 2080 with 4 expansions on it, and it's kind of a famous synthesizer. Because the guy who sold it to me used to make the Blue Mountain cards, e-cards. Like he was one of the first e-card makers, and that was used on all of those. So he was in my neighborhood, and I bought that from him, and it has the vocal things on it, but it also had like 500 pretty usable sounds. So I started finding myself liking that, and then when Vaporwave came, and I started listening to like FM bass lines, I was like, wow, I'm missing out. I don't, when I was younger, I was naive. So now I have DX7, DX7 2FD, TX813, DX21, DX11, the Korg DS8. I've got and that's for FM, and I have Roland JD800, which is probably one of my nicer synths. And I have, one of my very, very, very favorite synths is the Yamaha SY85.
Right, and I guess that's probably not one of the most expensive ones compared to either going one way, the DX range, or the other more recent ones.
Yeah, and I bought that with it, because that was during COVID, so I had nothing to do. So if a synthesizer came for sale, I'd put the mask on, the gloves on, and I would go meet them at their door, and I would wipe it down before it got in the car. But I was getting a lot of synths for free. Like I got the Casio CZ5000. A guy traded me for a cassette tape player for it, and I was giddy on the way home. I was like, this is so cool. But now I have a lot of digital synths, and I really enjoy them, and because I realize analog only goes so far. It doesn't really get into realism very well. So when you go to the digital, I mean, sky's the limit. You can have flutes, you can have pianos, things that you just can't do on an analog synth.
Yeah, and then do you then, where do you draw the line? Is in saying of modern gear? How far would you go? With its modern equipment.
It depends on because everybody knows Espen Craftslay's video, right? Where he's like, if you're buying new synthesizers, you're getting scammed because it's an OS in there, and a lot of it's digital inside. So I've reeled back, and there's not a lot of new gear that I'm interested in right now. I kind of like the way sampling's going. Their samplers now are very powerful, very small. So small format is important to me. All the new gear I'm looking at is all stuff that can fit in one case. I just can't carry the heavy gear to gigs anymore.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the thing when you gigging is different from studio, isn't it? Because you need practical, reliable, lightweight, and you're not. Whereas you don't. So do you take any of your vintage stuff out with you, or do you just go with the new stuff?
I always play with my MS-10, and usually my Juno 106 when I play live. And that's probably been for the last 18 years. And those are just the ones I take out. I used to take Jupiter 6, 106, the MS-10. Like, I'm talking about like a carload of gear to a gig that's only going to pay $25. So I'm the guy with the $5,000 in the gear going to the gig that only pays $20. And after a while, it kind of wore on me, and my body just couldn't keep lifting that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
So now I really just want compact things. Like, I want my effects very minimal, good effects, but not rack gear. I mean, geez, you can imagine like those big bands in the '80s. They had roadies to carry all that stuff. I
Yeah,
mean, some
yeah,
of them
yeah.
did. It was heavy. It was real heavy.
I always think, some of those, 80s, even the 70s one, they're lugging around a Mellotron and a Hammond B3.
God,
And,
oh my God, like yeah, Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
yeah. So over your time, are there any particular synths that you've sort of really wanted, you struggled to find them, you found them, and then when you've got them, they've not been what you expected, and then you've traded them up?
I have a good story on that. There's not been a lot of those. Um, but I have three mistakes I made. I bought a Jupiter 6 in 2002 for $900. It was dead mint. It was perfect. And I was kind of playing edgier music, more experimental stuff. And I was like, man, this is like an 80s hit maker. I mean, everything sounded familiar to me. So I was like, I don't know. And like, then I started playing drums in a band, and I ended up selling it for $900, the same amount I paid for it. And I've been chasing after one of those ever since. I always thought these will never be worth that much money. I'll always be able to repurchase them. Nope, no sir, can't do it. And the other one is I got a Emu SP 1200 Turbo for $50, and it was missing a button. That was the only thing wrong with it. And I started playing with it. Of course, I found out Prince used one, and all these other people used one, and I was like, oh, it sounds really like wood, and well, it wasn't like an 808 snappy sound. So I sold that for $300, and now they're like $3,500. I wished I'd have kept that. I really didn't know much about sampling at that point in time. And then there's one that will always haunt me. In 2018, I got a call from somebody who said it was a friend of a friend. He's a luthier, and he had a guitar shop in Boulder, Colorado. No, Louisville, Colorado. It was in Boulder County. And he says, hey, I got an ARP 2600. Come take a look at it. So I went over, and he pulls this ARP out. It doesn't look like he's ever seen light before. It was museum grade. And I was like, giddy. I'd never really seen one in the flesh like that. And this guy was like, what do you think it's worth? And I'm like, I was like, I don't know. It's like, then I was like, 5 or 6. And he's like, well, it doesn't have the power supply. And someone said not to power it up. So I was like, yeah, you're probably right. So he ordered the power supply, but he was too afraid to hook it up, and I wouldn't hook it up. And he was like, you can have it for 4,000. And so in my mind, it's like, I can sell my Juno 60. And I was like, I don't really want to sell that though. And so it just ate me up inside for like a week. I was like, how am I going to get this? So I tried to get the Boulder Philharmonic to buy it and like lease it to me or something. And I just couldn't pull it off in time. And he really worked hard with me to try and get me that synthesizer. And that was the one that I think really got away. Now those are very expensive.
And what are your sort of thoughts on the reissues, things like Korg bringing out the PS 3600, isn't it?
Yeah.
I saw it at 33. I saw it at Synthfest last week. Although it said it wasn't working, so I couldn't actually play it. But
really, that's not good.
Yeah, it was a non-working model, I think, was what they said. Yeah, but
Display
So what do you? Yeah, and they brought out that they've done some 2600s and mini Korgs and stuff. So what do you think about those sort of recreations?
When they're faithful one-to-one recreations, I'm 100% behind them. Now thinking back to Espen's video, I wonder how much OS is in their digital envelopes and things like that. I really didn't think about that too much. I just was like, oh wow, Prophet 5, OBX 8, that's coming back. Like, these are awesome synthesizers that now you can buy new. You don't have to fight for a used one or look for one that's broken already. I think they're good, but I think the price point is a little out of range. I think they should be more competitive. But there's a lot of companies now that are making, I hate to say knockoffs. I really don't want to diss any synth manufacturer, but there's things that you can achieve the sounds for at a very low price point. I think that's a good thing, but they don't interest me at all. I like the history aspect of the synthesizer. I like the way they smell. I like the way the keys feel. I like the way the knobs feel, and they're not always identical to each. Different one's going to sound a little bit different than another one. I like that aspect. And when you start buying these new ones, it's very predictable.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I bought the TX7. I've already got Dext and other FM emulators. but still I use the TX7 because I like it, and it's not got buttons all over it like an analog synth. You still got to program it from either a DX7 or PC, but there's something about it. But then I did get the Behringer Selena.
Yeah,
because I wanted that. I really love it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I love that string ensemble sound. I didn't want to pay for an old one. So yeah, I did get it, and it's very convenient. It's a little module. It just sits over in the rack over there, and I've got it hooked up to a controller. And I do have a tendency to use it on everything because it always sounds great on that.
That's good to know. That's on my list of things that if I start gigging again and I need a string sound, I'll buy it. Yeah. Currently, don't have any Behringer gear. But when I was in my 20s, Behringer gear was like the kiss of death. Like those mixers were dying on stage, and you would go to a gig, and there would be a piece of Behringer gear on the ground, like stomped to death. Like, and I've seen that more than one time. So when they started making synthesizers, first off, I got really excited when I saw VCS3. And I was like, wow, those are synthesizers I'm never going to be able to afford. And I was really excited. But as time went on, I got less and less interested. And now I just kind of think I have everything I need. Unless I'm going to be gigging with it, I want a light one. I'll probably buy something new that's light.
Yeah, I mean, it's great for that because you can just plug a MIDI cable in and from a controller.
MIDI. Yeah. Your options are nothing when it comes to string machines. Like that's one of the very few that does have MIDI. I think that is one of the more valuable instruments that's being reissued right now.
Yeah. So if someone's listening and thinks, watching it, thinks, I love synthesizer, I want to get into it. What would you say is the best way if they want to get into the vintage synthesizer? What's the best way to start?
I always point to the MS-10 because it's such an easy way to learn how to make sounds with. But it's really in your budget, and I help people a lot. Like if they are looking for something, I'm always looking, and I'll tell them, kind of, if you really want a JX3P, if you wait, 6 months, you'll find one for $300. I've found one every year of my life for $300, and it's not easy, and the competition's steep now. But JX3P is a good one to start with. MS-10 is a great one to start with. MS-20 is a good one to start with. I would almost say Odyssey, but I found that to have a little bit of a learning curve. It didn't really have instant feedback. Like the sounds weren't awesome at first until you learn how to use it, and then it's amazing. But there's so many synthesizers to look through now. And I mean, you can still get them relatively cheap. It's not an everyday thing like it used to be, but if you look hard enough, you'll find the cheaper ones.
And where should where do you go to start? Where do you start looking?
It used to be Craigslist and eBay. And I always look for weird stuff. Like I'll misspell things intentionally, and that's worked in my favor a few times. But now it's everything seems to be on Facebook Marketplace. And that's good and bad. And I'm living in New Jersey. It's the most populated per capita state in the United States. So there is mountains of stuff for sale on there every day. But it's there's no ethics and no morals here. So I'll be driving to pick something up and it'll say sold. I'm like, got the address and the time, and so I'll pull over and I'll say, yeah, that's for me, right? And they'll be like, oh no, somebody down the street offered me $100 more. And I was like, wow, like that stings. And that happens out here, like I'd say 7 out of 10 times. And it really irks me. Like I'm a person who thinks that person should be they should be accountable for their word. And I had a guy that I bought a Alpha Juno 1 from. It was like $70. And when I showed up, he's like, you have no idea how many people are after this. And he's like, they're offering me all kinds of money. I was like, how much money? He's like, I don't know. He's like, one guy offered $200 more than you did. I said, well, my word's worth more than $200. And he put his hand out and he says, mine too. He's like, so those things still happen. But the greed now is really upsetting because there's people who have no business with these synthesizers. And they are racing there. I don't know what they tell these people, but they're beating me to them, more than half the time.
Yeah. I suppose maybe like everything, these things are cyclical, and the prices they won't become as much of a thing to non-musicians, and so
Yeah.
they may become more affordable. And I suppose things like the Behringers added to the mix might make people also. Some people, instead of paying steep amounts for the second-hand ones, might look at new ones. I don't know, but I'm hoping that things would settle down and make it a bit more affordable for people.
No, yeah, and I wish they did too, because back in the day, I would tell everybody what to look for and what to expect to pay for, and be pretty close to accurate. And now I really think that younger musicians should definitely go for the Behringer gear. I mean, you're not getting paid by a record label, and your options of making money in music are almost nil. So what's the point in investing all that money? Like, if my studio were to disappear, it'd be gone forever. There's no way I could recuperate that. And it's all insured, thank God. But if it wasn't, I'd just be, I'd have to find something else to do. I'd have to buy some cheaper new stuff, and I wouldn't be as crazy as I am now.
Well, it's good to be crazy, and I think it's great when someone like you who's collecting these synths, but is an enthusiast and a user of them. That's the main thing, is it? So they're not left on a shelf. They actually, I know you can't use them all at once when you've got them in storage, but you do, you do enjoy using them. I think that's the main thing. And I think the group that you're in, the Vintage Synth group on Facebook, I don't big Facebook user, but that group I found really interesting. I just like reading some of the things that people put on video clips, and it's great. But there's a good community behind it as well. If you
is that the one that I admin? Is that the
yes? I think
I'm really trying to make that to be the most friendliest, accessible group, because I got tired of just being talked down to and really harassed by people and other groups. Like, if I put my studio up, first comment would be like, "How many finished tracks do you have?" Like, I'm not my brother's keeper. I don't really care. I probably have 200 CDs that I've recorded off the board, and even more cassettes and reel-to-reels that is never mastered. So somebody will get those one day. But when I realized that there's no limo for me, there's not going to be any flashy lights, there's not going to be a six-figure paycheck, it just kind of takes the incentive out. And with everybody as self-promoters, that's one thing in the group. I don't let people post their music, because 9 times out of 10, no one listens to it. I really wish, if people did listen to it, I would really encourage it, but then it becomes just like spam. So I have to delete them after a couple of weeks when there's no hits on it. There's just too many, one person bands in the bedroom producing, decent electronic music.
Yeah, but there's a nice. I always find everybody very friendly in there, and you didn't feel intimidated by, I haven't got a CS80, so I can't post in there. You felt it was nice and friendly.
Yeah, some people will say, like, I only have one synthesizer. I'm like, if you even just like them, you're welcome here. It has nothing to do with that. If you have a million or none, if you just love these things, you're welcome. Like, we're all here to teach everybody, and I'm hoping that this is something that is contagious and the other groups will start picking up on it, because they are really negative spaces. A lot of them.
Yeah. And especially if we want younger people to enjoy the thing that we have, and to maintain that, to maintain that enthusiasm for all this gear. If we keep shutting people down, then you'll drive them away. It's not an elitist thing. It's it should be for everybody that can get. And like you said, you don't have to spend huge amounts of money, especially if you're good with the soldering iron. You can pick up some bargains.
Yeah, there's a guy in the group the other day, and he said he needed to do a battery swap, and I think it was a Juno 60. And I was like, man, this is really easy work. I'd hate to see you go spend $500 on this. And he's like, I can't do anything. I can't cook, nothing like that mechanical. So I understand. But for me, I had my power go out once, and it was in the middle of winter, and I hadn't paid my bill. And I was like, damn it. So I called the electric company, and they said, I got my balance up to zero. And they said it would cost, I got my balance correct. And they said it would take like 24 hours for the power to turn back on. And I said, it's like 10 degrees outside. And she's like, I'm sorry. And I said, are you sending a robot? And she says, what do you mean? I said, are you sending a robot to turn my power back on? She says, no, I'm sending a man. I said, well, then I can do it. I said, I'm going to go turn the power back on now. And she's like, well, we'll fine you $75. And I said, I'm okay with that. And that power was back on in like 2 hours. But that's when synthesizers broke. I used that same logic as like, they aren't sending a fucking physicist to fix these things. He's just a guy. Like, so most of the things that you can learn how to desolder and solder and take chips in and out, you can do most of the maintenance.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, like you said, there's plenty of tutorials and groups where you can ask advice as well.
Yeah, that's where YouTube is like very handy. Like when I had my JD800, there was a person there that detailed like how to do the keys and that red glue stuff and the weights and how to replace just about anything on the synthesizer. And I mean, they just do that out of the goodness of their heart. There's a lot of people on there teaching you how to replace keys and do all sorts of stuff. I mean, I can work on cars now because of YouTube.
Yeah. Well, I did my DX100 battery, and I thought I'll film me doing it just on the off chance. Anyway, I did, and eventually I thought, yeah, I'll post this because if I needed to find it, so I'm sure somebody else will, and and hopefully somebody else has found that useful. And I think it's a nice way of passing on sort of that knowledge.
Yeah, it's definitely. So you've seen my YouTube page. I started that in like 2011, and my whole thing is I didn't want ads to run across it. My point was not to make money off any of this stuff, and that was just before all the influencers came. And now people make a living off of doing synthesizer demonstrations. And my thing used to be like just to throw a mic in the room and record what it sounds like in an environment. And then I got yelled at, do a direct recording. So I started doing that. And then Facebook monetized my page against my will. And I got really upset and I didn't do anything else. And now I'm kind of regretting it. And I'm trying to reinvent that channel because there's a lot, there's some of the videos have like 60, 70,000 hits on them. So I got the foundation, but I just don't want to be a sellout. I think that's the thing.
Yeah, but I think people want to, maybe, your collection, people will want to see them and want a demo of them. And, maybe you should get, just if you put YouTube ads on it, you're not going to be making millions off that one, are you? But if you get like a couple £100, then it helps go towards maintaining them and getting the next one. So I think people would be interested in that. And I've seen some of your videos, and and from just like if you did a series of just your string machines and did an hour video on each one of them, I'd definitely be watching those.
Here's the next thing I'm going to do. Let me show you this. So I have one of these, original Mutron Phaser 2.
Oh, yeah.
And it's one of my favorite pedals, but it doesn't run slow enough. That's something that I want to change about it. But I want to run every string machine through there and do a video of what the phasers all sound like. I want to do a phaser shootout, string machine shootout, and really show what it feels like and looks like to pair these things with real effects and in a real environment. It's not going to be sterile. I want it to be very loose.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of stuff I like to watch. I know there's a lot of influencers out there, but I'm not really that keen on those. I like seeing people who've got their own gear, and I find that more interesting. Well, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you, Sean. I really appreciate you coming on the show this week.
Absolutely.
So if anybody wants to, where's the best place to go then if they want to find out more about your studio stuff or you or in general?
I would say the group, Vintage Synthesizers and Effects. They can look me up on YouTube at Distance Research, and I'm also on Facebook with Schroeder Analog and Distance Research, and I'm dropping breadcrumbs here and there on there. But I'll be doing more content soon. So if they just find me on Facebook, they're going to find the links.
Yeah, well, I'll include a link to the group and the on YouTube on the description with the video. Well, it's absolutely brilliant talking to you, and maybe when we'll get you back on the show in the future, and we'll talk some more.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks to Sean. Really enjoyed that chat. look out for the next few weeks. We've got some really different interviews on here. Like, we're going to be talking to Windows updates. We're going to be talking about Microsoft Surface. We're going to be talking to keyboard player from Micro Mechanics about his synth collection and lots more. So see you on the next show.